Now hear this. Now hear this. On this week's episode of Kirking Off, we're beaming over to the USS Voyager to hang out with Captain Janeway before she and her misfit crew get flung 70,000 light years into the Delta Quadrant. The mission today is to help you understand the dynamics of the Voyager crew, to help you understand the backdrop in which the crew operates, and to help you understand all of the possibilities that exist when you're 20 years away from the nearest Federation space station. So join us in the mess hall and prepare to spoon the hot tomato soup of our Star Trek Voyager opinions into your hungry little mouths.
Welcome to Kirking Off, a warped Star Trek shakedown with hosts Nathan and Dean.
Got a fine tan shirt with an emblem on the chest.
So we're back by popular demand to do an episode that we've done recently, which is a primer episode, Nathan. And we have a couple of Voyager episodes we're going to be discussing after this primer episode. And people really responded to the Deep Space Nine primer. If you haven't heard it yet, it's called Welcome to Terok Nor. Check it out. It'll give you a little bit of a grasp on what to expect out of Deep Space Nine. This has been a lot of fun to do these. It's been cool to go in and watch and read and know about what is setting up these series. I'm going to give you a peek behind the curtain. I am much less familiar with Voyager. I'm much less familiar with the crew. To be frank, I'm not as much of a fan. Yep. Now, as I am conducting myself in something called Kirking Off, I want to make sure that I know a little bit about what the hell I'm talking about, because I'm sure Voyager is someone somewhere's favorite series.
Indeed.
So
there's actually a decent amount of love out there for the series.
Yeah.
And it's something that I have not yet really understood myself.
I bet it comes retrospectively. A lot of these series seem to be the case.
Yes. Like once you get into it, especially maybe perhaps, as an adult or I also think Voyager just came at the wrong time in my life because I was, in college and stuff like that.
Correct.
I had a lot of shit going on.
Yep.
So it was not, there was no must-see TV.
It ran from 95 to 2001, if you need a frame of reference there.
So yeah, no college. Well, yeah, all 4 years of my college, really.
Yep.
But then also the last couple of years of high school. So
sure.
I think I was just trying to move away from TV at that point.
Right.
Generally.
Mm-hmm.
So I missed out on Voyager as its original run. And
you were too punk rock for TV?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
I get it.
And then, I had a lot of studying to do, I swear. But so we ended up with basically an entire series that I've never watched. And I have tried to sit down and watch a few times, and I've never gotten that far into it. But for different reasons. Again, mostly I think for time and stuff. Like maybe it's not necessarily speaking to me in the way that DS9 does or Next Gen does. But rewatching it most recently, I don't get the sense it's a terrible show or anything.
Right.
But for some reason, I just never got into it. I'm sure that says a lot more about my psychology than anything else.
Sure.
Maybe it's the girl captain.
I doubt that's the case.
I doubt it as well. I'm making a joke.
Right. But that said, I know you've been struggling with your propensity to hate women and your misogyny in general, and that after years of therapy, you're finally coming around. So what timing? This is a breakthrough moment for you.
I mean, I've stopped murdering hookers, and I'm okay with Voyager.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's good that we're
two equally important things in my life.
We're getting to the bottom of your psychology. I think that's important. It's so funny. That never even occurred to me, other than when it was out, somebody was like, "Oh, the captain's a woman," and we all just went, "Cool,
yeah."
It was, we were used to seeing Sarah Connors and Ripley's and we meaning me and my friends, it didn't stop us from watching it. I just didn't watch it, just like I didn't watch DS9 originally, right? Yeah. So you just take a while to come around on these things. But all of that horseshit aside, Star Trek Voyager, to give people a bit of a frame of reference, especially if you are a Star Trek fan and you've been into other Star Trek series, the Voyager is launched in 2341. What does that mean? Well, to anchor it to something you might know is this takes place during the Next Generation film Generations. So the Next Generation has concluded. The seventh season has passed, and now we're into Next Generation movie number 1, Star Trek Generations, the movie in which, of course, Kirk dies.
Yeah.
We're also in...
Spoiler alert.
I mean, at this point, let's get real. Deep Space Nine Season 3 we're into, and how apropos that we just discussed Deep Space Nine, because what do we see for the launching of Voyager but it at Deep Space Nine, docked?
Yep. Yeah, because its very first mission is actually going to involve the Maquis. And we know, obviously they're in a conflict with the Cardassians and that they're fairly close by to DS9. So this is a Starfleet resource that's close to the area of where our mission is going to be taking place.
Right. And the Maquis is something we held off on getting into a little bit for the Welcome to Terok Nor episode, but I would say it behooves us to talk a little bit about them now. So Janeway's first mission is to locate a Maquis ship that goes missing.
Yep.
This ship goes missing in a section of space called the Badlands, which is essentially a place of crazy stellar storms. It looks like you're flying through space tornadoes. It's very dangerous, a place where a lot of disreputable types would hide away from the prying eyes of whatever legal authority was pursuing them at the time. Great place for pirates, smugglers, and apparently the Maquis. Let's talk about the Maquis.
The Maquis de Sade.
The Maquis de Sade. So the Maquis is a group of what they would consider independent peoples who are, in their opinion, fighting for their own independence and the defense of their own homes. There were a bunch of colonies, a bunch of Federation colonies that were situated near Cardassian colonies. Now, we talked a lot about the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, etc. But what we didn't talk much about is how the Federation was at war with the Cardassians for some time. In 2367, Nathan, there's this thing called the Federation-Cardassian Armistice. 3 years later, it leads to the Federation-Cardassian Treaty, which is 1 year before the Voyager launches.
Okay.
The Maquis, as I said, they're not Federation freedom fighters. That might be something I've said in the past. It's not necessarily a great descriptor because they consider themselves independent of the Federation. They're essentially...
the Federation essentially betrayed them.
Right.
By pulling out and leaving all of their worlds and stuff to the Cardassians.
As far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
Correct.
They're pissed off at the Federation.
Right. And they fight the Cardassians and sometimes the Federation. So this DMZ or demilitarized zone is established between the Cardassians and the Federation. And this demilitarized zone is a slice of real estate through the middle of these two territories, which essentially becomes, okay, these colonies now fall under Cardassian jurisdiction and these colonies now fall under Federation jurisdiction. The Federation reaches out to these colonies, which now fall under Cardassian jurisdiction, and they say, here's what happened. We are at a war. It's not been great. We're coming to a peace agreement and an armistice, and now we're having a treaty. You have to relocate. Now, I also may have been misleading by saying worlds. Not whole worlds, colonies. But it doesn't matter. It's homes. It's people who have lived here and people who are like, but we don't want to be under Cardassian jurisdiction and we don't want to move just because you say so. We don't want to be relocated. So these Maquis feel as if the Federation didn't do enough to stand up for their rights as Federation citizens. And they said, well, we the people are not going to be part of the Federation anymore, so take that.
Yeah.
And it got contentious because the Cardassians like, you're ours now, bitch. And they're like, no, we're not. We're our own people. And the Cardassians are like, but your people who you came from, sign this. And of course, that gets contentious.
Yeah. And we've seen that the Cardassians aren't particularly fond of rebellion or even, anyone in their territory going against their wishes.
That's right.
I mean, we've seen how brutal they can be when they've taken your colony, like Bajor.
Sure.
But we actually have seen this through a bunch of the different series. Even Next Gen has some Maquis issues. And in particular, I'm thinking of the episode where they're supposed to be removing the Native American
Yes.
tribes.
That's an
from-
Ensign Rowe ep.
Yeah, well, and
And a
Wesley.
Wesley
yeah,
ep. Yeah, that's a big Wesley ep.
Yeah, he stands up and decides he doesn't want to be in Starfleet anymore.
His best moment in the whole series was leaving Starfleet and thus the show.
Yeah, well, and coming to the reality that he was doing what he thought his dad wanted him to do,
Sure.
following in his footsteps and the like, and instead he was going to follow that interstellar child molesting guy.
Yeah.
The Traveler. But no, so we've seen the fallout from the Cardassian Federation War through all 3 series.
Yes.
And in fact, I mean, it's so much the background of Deep Space Nine politically, and it is introduced through Next Gen, and we see various aspects of it as like kind of almost a moral question
Sure.
of the Federation's behavior. But in Voyager, we're going to get a very different aspect of it.
Indeed. And this is just a background to put you in the position that Janeway finds herself in. So we've just painted a picture in an attempt to be objective. I think it's no secret that Nathan and I both love the Maquis. Maybe they engage in behavior they shouldn't, right? But in a strange sense, you could almost tie them to the American colony, saying, well, we are independent. We're independent from you now. Yeah. Since with the stroke of a pen, you've decided that our homes now are under Cardassian jurisdiction, we don't accept this. Yeah. And some people became fighters as a result of this. And boy, talk about an over-romanticized force to join the Cardassians and the Federation after you. That's just no good. That's a no-win scenario, essentially. It's too big, right? And without getting into how successful they are or aren't, that will be covered as we bounce back into Deep Space Nine, et cetera. We don't want to give too much of that away. But it's a good backdrop for what is going to be the rest of this discussion about Voyager, because it gives us a bit of a perspective on some of the characters. Mm-hmm. And I think this is important to discuss because we're going to talk about the Voyager crew. So we have Captain Catherine Janeway. And at this time, we are going to have, right now it's Captain Janeway, an unknown medical guy, a couple of unknowns that just aren't going to make it. And then we have Commander Tuvok, who's a Vulcan chief of security. We have Harry Kim, and that's kind of it.
Well, I was going to say, actually, Tuvok right now is the main source of their mission. They're actually looking for that Maquis ship because he is on it.
Yes. So,
undercover.
So let's talk about the lead up to how Voyager, which we've kind of buried the lead here. The whole point of Voyager is it gets flung 70,000 light years away into the Delta Quadrant. But what happened before that? Yeah. We know they get flung very far away, and the voyage home is essentially their mission. Mm-hmm. But what gets them there, and then what's the backdrop? Much like we provided for Welcome to Terok Nor. And that's precisely what you're talking about. Tuvok has infiltrated this missing Maquis vessel. So Janeway wants her commander back, who is a security man who's infiltrated a Maquis vessel. She wants to capture this Maquis vessel because it's a fugitive as far as the Federation is concerned. So that's her mission. She goes to DS9. She's like, here we're going to go. We're going to shoot to the Badlands where they were last seen. We're going to scoop them up. We're going to come home. Mission done. No problem. We have the Voyager. They have a small ship. We're going to be fine. We also have people. We have
an inside man.
We have infiltrated their ship with an inside man. So seems like a routine, if not a little bit dangerous mission. Let's talk about the Maquis vessel and who's on the Maquis vessel that they are going after before being flung 70,000 years away.
As far as main named characters, we have Chakotay, who's the captain of the Maquis vessel.
Yep.
He is actually also a former Starfleet officer.
Yes.
So left Starfleet to join the Maquis.
Yes.
Because he thought their cause was just.
And his dad died.
Yes.
So Chakotay's father dies, I want to say in 2368, somewhere around there, his dad dies. So as this is 2371, that's 3 years ago. So he's been out of Starfleet and part of the Maquis. He's felt sympathetic to the Maquis. And you'll learn throughout Voyager that they really ham up the American Indian thing and the spirituality, and Chakotay wants nothing to do with it. And then as he gets older, he kind of comes back to it. His father dies, and he's like, what are we doing? And if there's one group of people who understands relocation historically in America, it's the American Indians. So Chakotay, being an American Indian, following this culture closely throughout time, even hundreds of years later in this Star Trek future, he's pretty sympathetic to relocation efforts. So he does get sympathetic with the death of his father and all of the cultural relevance for the American Indian history to go, this is fucked up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do something about it.
And it is almost an extension of that Next Generation episode that we mentioned.
Yes.
Where Picard's mission is to relocate
Yes.
a Native American colony.
Right.
And then, so in the Maquis ship, we also have a half Klingon, half human. I believe she's the engineer of the Maquis ship as well. B'Elanna Torres.
Yep. So Chakotay, Tuvok, and B'Elanna Torres, well, if you look at the picture, you know they're all part of the Voyager crew. So how does this happen? Janeway says, I need a helmsman. So she has an idea in mind for a helmsman. She could have anybody in the galaxy, or anybody in Starfleet, I guess, for this mission. She probably has a lot of choices for helmsmen. But there's one man in particular who is very, very skilled, almost a savant as far as pilots go. And his father was an admiral. Great. Seems like the perfect fit, doesn't it? Insert Tom Paris. Tom Paris is another character on Voyager. Tom Paris has a bit of a background himself. We see their first encounter, him wearing a goddamn ankle bracelet like Corrado Soprano, right? Why are you under this proximity arrest? What's going on here? What did Tom Paris do?
Well, so he had been in Starfleet.
Yes.
He had done well. See, here's the interesting thing. So the actor Robert O'Neill or Robert Duncan O'Neill,
something like that,
is the same guy that played Cadet Nick Locarno.
Yes.
In a Next Generation episode. And in that episode, he...
a maneuver, right?
Yes. He does this maneuver that kills 3 other cadets.
Mm-hmm.
He's talked them into doing it and everything, and he's kind of the driving force because he's a really great pilot. And so he does that and ends up getting drummed out of Starfleet Academy.
Yes.
This is not that character.
No. However,
it's like identical.
I think in retrospect, they wanted it to be this character.
It did. And then I guess there was some issue with almost licensing or something of the name.
That's shitty.
Yeah. And you would think it's all Star Trek. How can you not do that? And we know Worf is going to show up on Deep Space Nine eventually and stuff.
Yeah. He's not even there yet. He's still got a season to go.
Yeah.
As of the Voyager spot we're in.
And so I'm not entirely... I think it had to do with the writer of the episode, the Next Gen episode, or whatever, wouldn't give permission for that character to come back in Voyager for some reason. So they basically just renamed him, but kept, like, it seems most of the backstory and everything, and changed up, a little bit. So he was responsible for... We don't really know exactly what manner of accident or whatever, but something he did got 3 people killed.
Yes.
And so he resigned from Starfleet and shortly thereafter evidently joined the Maquis as well.
Right. So, and I think if there's a little more detail there, I think initially he tried to hide it and then he came forth with it.
He confessed.
And even though his initial instinct was to hide it, the confession was enough to probably not get him a horrific punishment, as it was in fact an accident. But we do see him in some kind of incarceration as a result of what he did. Or not as a result of what he did, but getting drummed out of Starfleet, as you said, which then led him to the Maquis. So here's a man, son of an admiral, hotshot, super talented, makes a mistake, people get killed, he gets drummed out, kind of gets off light as far as I'm concerned, and then finds himself less joining the Maquis, I'd say, more a peripheral sort of Han Solo sympathizer with the Maquis, right?
Well,
which is why he and Chakotay are at odds.
Yes, because he mentions, talking about his own backstory with, I believe, Ensign Harry Kim, who is kind of they've befriended each other, I should say.
Yes.
And he basically says, well, Chakotay, who had joined, the Maquis for all these principled reasons or whatever, viewed me as someone who was joining just looking for someone to pay my bar bill.
Right.
And he said he wasn't wrong.
Right.
So,
I like that. So Paris is kind of going
mercenary type.
He's going to be your devil may care character, right? He's going to be he comes on board wearing a Starfleet uniform with no insignia on
Yep.
it. He's literally, as Janeway says, an observer.
Yep.
She's not commissioning him to rank or anything of the sort. He's just there. Now, you might argue, why not just go for a reliable pilot you can trust? I think we want to believe that Janeway, having served, we didn't mention this, with Tom's dad, who's now an admiral, probably makes her sympathetic to the kid a little bit
Yep.
and thinks there's something there. I could use this something. I could use out-of-the-box thinking. If I'm going to be pursuing Maquis, I want a man who knows the Maquis.
Yeah.
Right.
And also knows the Badlands.
Absolutely.
Specifically.
Yep. You might not want that. You might not want that sort of university-trained, very specific by-the-book pilot. You might want the hot shot to chase down these Maquis people in an area of space not well known, an area of space that he apparently knows quite well.
Yep. Yeah. Because of his experience with them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny that Chakotay is this man who finds himself joining the Maquis. Labeled by Cisco, I believe, at some point, a terrorist organization, just period, full stop. And Chakotay takes issue with a guy like Tom Paris. So we see this interesting honor in Chakotay to where he's like, this guy's just a merc. He was just trying to get the money for the bar bill, to which Tom Paris cops to. But if you ask Cisco, he's like, you're both criminals.
Yeah.
Like if you're both terrorists to him. Janeway finds herself in a very different situation because so the important part of this is, how are you going to convince the audience, and how is Janeway going to be convinced, more importantly, and thus convince the audience that Chakotay, who we've just talked about, B'Elanna Torres, who's a Maquis, we don't know why, we don't know much about her motivation just yet, and this merc Tom Paris, how are they going to make up a crew of the Voyager? How's that going to happen? Well, while in pursuit, something crazy happens, Nathan. What happens while they're pursuing this vessel?
Well, we should say that the Maquis ship disappeared days ago.
Yeah, it goes missing.
From the Badlands, it just vanished. There was a Cardassian ship in pursuit.
Yep.
So, there's some clue. They know where they disappeared, so to speak. But so Voyager goes looking for them, only to also get hit by this mysterious, rolling wave.
Yes.
I think it's like a tachyon disruption wave or something.
Sure.
Some kind of,
Gobbledygook.
Science-y gobbledygook.
Science fiction gobbledygook.
And they get basically sucked or pulled into the Delta Quadrant.
They do.
To find that the Maquis ship has been there for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the crew is missing.
Yes.
And then, I was going to say, the process of pulling Voyager there is not kind. It kills half a dozen people on the bridge and throughout the whole ship, numerous other people, including the doctor we didn't get attached to,
Sure.
the XO who we did get attached to,
Sure.
the helmsman, conveniently enough, who was a Betazoid.
Yep.
A woman gets killed. The nurse, a Vulcan nurse, dead. So the whole medical staff pretty much is dead.
Yes.
And then half the bridge crew dead. And
fortunately, none of the characters we just named.
No,
otherwise we wouldn't have bothered to name them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we end up with a now ragtag crew, and they're suddenly next to this massive array.
Yes.
That is evidently the source of whatever pulled them there.
Correct.
In fact, it's shooting off like energy pulses at a planet nearby, and it's just generally a mystery now what they're doing. In addition to having a smashed up ship,
which can all be you can watch this on the Caretaker 1 and 2 part episode. They go into all of the very, very finite details of what's going on, which I think we will cover in just a high level area because it's all part of this primer that we're discussing here.
Well, and that's just to say that suddenly Voyager finds itself with a lot of let's just say openings.
Yeah,
job openings.
You could say that again.
And they need to fill them. And so the Maquis crew is a natural fit since now we have all of our, what's the word I'm looking for? Not orphans.
Sure.
Not vagabond. They're far from home.
They are far from home.
They're all far from the Alpha Quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the exact word I'm trying to think of.
That's okay.
Because my brain is, as we've said, fading.
Keep drinking your coffee.
Yeah.
They're refugees.
Yes, that's a good one. Refugees.
Right.
They are Alpha Quadrant refugees, 70,000 light years from home.
Right. Now, to give you just an indication as to what that means at their best technological propulsion advancements in 2371, they're 20 years from home.
Yeah.
20 years.
Of flying it, like maximum
of flying it as fast as they possibly can. So that is a considerable problem. We say these words alpha, beta, gamma, quadrant, delta quadrant. I believe that's the 4 quadrants.
Yep.
So try to imagine these giant cubes in space that kind of break it up. So you got an alpha cube, a beta cube, a gamma cube, and a delta cube. And the gamma, and they're massive, 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 as we've just discussed, 70,000 light years away from. Right,
Yeah.
This is massive distances.
All of the galactic empires we've talked about all occupy the alpha quadrant.
That's a good point. Yep,
And
we know
and
nothing.
only a small portion of it.
The
Essentially.
only thing we know about the delta quadrant at this point, Nathan, other than what we learned from, say, the first couple episodes of Voyager, is that's where the Borg come from. The
Yeah.
Borg come from there. So, oh, good, the Borg come from the delta quadrant. That's all we know. Like you said, everything we've ever talked about exists in the alpha quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great point. So, to talk a little bit more about the details of this mission and how they get thrust together, is that the Voyager crew encounters this array, and they encounter this essentially this caretaker who has been taking care of this race of people called the Ocampa. And this matters because we're going to get 2 more crew people. We're going to get Neelix, who's a Delta Quadrant native. We're going to get Kess, a Delta Quadrant native.
Mm-hmm.
These 2 characters are going to also become part of the Voyager crew. And do we want to talk about them a little bit, the array?
Sure.
Do we want to talk a little bit about the caretaker ep? Because I think it plays into the primer here.
For sure it does. Basically, when they are investigating what exactly the caretaker did, and
We're in the Delta Quadrant. What the hell?
we're going to try
70,000
to convince the caretaker to send us home, too.
Right.
That becomes mission number 1.
Yep.
And so they have to get into the background of why the caretaker is taking care of the Ocampa.
Yes.
And why he's suddenly pulling in all of these folks from all over the galaxy.
Right.
And why our crew has suffered that same fate.
Mm-hmm. And the crew of the Maquis ship.
Yeah. And in doing so, they come across a Talaxian
Yes.
named Neelix, who is, kind of a vagabond type of, junk scavenger.
He's a
stuff like that.
scavenger, essentially, with a lot of personality.
Yes.
I want to say that right now. One of the things...
None of it good. No.
I like his personality. Yeah. One of the things I think that the Voyager crew gets a rap for is sort of this... how likable are these characters, right? So, you have Chakotay, who's very serious. You have Paris, who's kind of like the I guess you'd say more the typical kind of roguish type. Then you have B'Elanna Torres, who's just angry all the time. Ensign Harry Kim, the younger sort of guy, taking it all in. And you end up with this, because your medical crew got wiped out, this emergency holographic program, which handles medical care. And then Tuvok, another serious character. Janeway, a serious character. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people quite serious in this show. And in a lot of times they get a bad rap for what seems to be a lack of charisma. Now, I don't know if that's true because I don't have enough of a sample size to say one way or the other. Mm-hmm. But here's what I do know. Neelix stands out from them instantly. He dresses crazy. He's got crazy hair, crazy markings on his body. He's a big, exuberant personality immediately. And he brings a lot of personality into what seems to be at the surface at the beginning a pretty dry crew.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, sometimes that is a little over the top.
Of course.
And I think that was what a lot of people, kind of viewed him as more of the
slapstick.
Yeah, and which didn't quite fit in with the rest of the series crew. And I think that's probably a fair critique in some episodes.
Sure.
And I think that kind of leads me to what my impression of Voyager was for the longest time, was that it was very uneven insofar as you would have characters behaving certain ways for certain episodes and then kind of very different in other episodes.
I see. So perhaps trying to find their sort of moral centers was difficult.
And exactly. And getting a sense of who the character was and why they were acting in any given fashion, instead of they were basically just doing things to move the plot along.
I see.
is kind of the impression I got for a long time. I don't know how accurate that is.
Right.
And looking at this, the initial few episodes I watched from season 1, I'm now curious if it more had to do with the fact that I had sort of jumped around amongst the episodes. So perhaps there are character arcs of which I am not terribly aware.
That's a really good sort of self-reflection.
Yeah.
So when I jump to season 6, am I seeing a character who has changed compared to season 2? And is that causing what appears to be this inconsistency in character?
Yes, exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
I like it. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we will. I'm sure we can look at it with much different eyes now, which will be curious when we hop around. We're gonna be hanging out in Voyager for about as long as we hang out in Deep Space Nine. I think we're doing this primer, and then we're gonna do, I guess, Phage and Eye of the Needle.
Yep.
Right. I think that's gonna be what we do before we bounce over to something else. But in terms of getting back to sort of this background piece here. This Ocampa people.
Yep.
We learn that there is this planet, and they experience something called the warming, which essentially wiped a bunch out, drove them underground, and come to find out this caretaker is responsible for it and feels a sense of guilt and duty to these people. Now, to be clear, the caretaker is vastly superior from a technological standpoint. So he's essentially provided them with this underground utopia of which they exist and essentially want for nothing, right?
Yeah.
For 1,000 years. Yeah. So the Ocampa are now dependent on the caretaker's intervention into them.
Yeah, they've lost like a lot of their innate kind of curiosity and ability to solve their own problems.
Yeah.
Basically, they're soft.
They're soft. Yeah, basically, the caretaker's created very much a nanny state in which he's done everything for them.
Yes. And he's literally sealed them underground.
He sealed them underground.
Away from everything else in the Delta Quadrant.
Right. Which we know they have some surface neighbors called the Kazon, correct?
Yes.
Or the Kazon Ogla. I don't know if there's a difference. That might just be Neelix's full name for them.
Yeah.
But we'll get to the Kazon later. As far as the Ocampa go, they have an interesting quality about them. Their lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
They
very short.
Only live 9 years. So we know going in that we're going to meet an Ocampa named Kes. She, we learn, is close to Neelix. I guess you'd almost say they're an item. And we learn that Kes is only going to live 9 years. And we don't even know how old she is now. She might live 5, 4, 3. We don't know how old she is, which is pretty wild to think about.
Yeah.
We often spend a lot of time in Star Trek talking about how long-lived certain races are. Rarely do we say, here's a short-lived race. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, and I almost think it's one way you could kind of explain how, while quickly is a funny word to use when we're talking about 2 millennia of caretaker intervention.
Exactly.
But
500 generations.
But yeah, you consider how many generations that is if you're only living, a decade.
Right.
So obviously there's a ton of potential to rapidly kind of de-evolve,
Indeed.
so to speak, into a more pacified and sort of you're adapting to your situation of having everything given to you.
Right.
So,
imagine how challenging it would be. When we speak about, when we say nanny state sort of pejoratively, if we think about that for just a second, we're thinking in modern terms.
Yeah.
Try to imagine 2,000 years, the whole of an entire civilization. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard to imagine 2,000 years in the United States, but just take the UK, for example. Take England. Take the year 400 to now. That's 1,600 years.
Yeah.
So you're telling me when the Anglo-Saxons became a thing, that whole time they were being propped up by this powerful thing.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Imagine then saying, okay, now we got to pull the plug in the year 2000 or 2010 or 2021. We're just going to pull the plug on these people who've evolved from the Anglo-Saxons and see what happens. That's a dangerous proposition.
Yeah. And the caretaker knows they're done for.
Absolutely.
Or we should also say the reason he's doing all of this is because he is himself dying.
Yes. So the caretaker's story is interesting as it relates to the origins of the Voyager series because he's an explorer. He had a partner. They found these people. In finding these people, they corrupted their atmosphere. Yeah. And then he said, I have an obligation here. And his partner said almost what Janeway is going to come to say, which is, you have to let these people figure this out on their own. But you can imagine the caretaker being, but it's my fault. I would imagine feeling that guilt instead of just going, well, we fucked up, time to walk away. And maybe the discussion between him and his mate, which may have been, set him up and then walk away.
Yeah.
But he got too meddlesome, I want to make it perfect for them. I feel bad about everything I did. His partner says, I'm going to continue exploring, and leaves him to his own devices. He has no partner. He can't procreate. He's reaching the end of his life, and he's like, now what am I going to do? Who's going to take care of the Ocampo when I'm gone? The name of the opening episode of Voyager is Caretaker for a reason. He feels responsible. He's looking at a situation where he's going to perish. He knows it, and he doesn't know exactly what to do, which gets into the whole point of what he's doing. He's dragging ships in from all over the galaxy.
Yep.
That's a powerful creature.
Yeah. And he's trying to see who can run the array.
Right. Who can I put my crazy caretaker baby into and see if they will run the array to continue this mission that I started for these people? That's the entire premise behind how the Voyager gets flung into the Delta Quadrant 70,000 light years away.
Mm-hmm. And so I think we should name this episode, did we just do the caretaker episode?
More or less. That's a good name.
Did we just cover caretaker?
We did, but we're not going to get too much into the minutia.
Yeah, into the minutia. But because there's really no, and this was what we struggled with talking about how we're going to cover Voyager. There's really no way to start without talking about caretaker because it sets up the whole series. And it's one of those situations where kind of, all right, now taking a step back to look at the series as a whole, that, I say that it actually ends up trying to meld a serial type episode setup with just the episodic Star Trek setup we've come to know and love from Next Gen. Because there is this overwhelming story arc of trying to get home.
Yes.
And so I don't know, but yet they also wanted to make it so you could just watch an episode.
Yes.
And kind of know what was going on and everything like that, or at least have an appreciation for what was going on without necessarily having to binge the whole series.
Right.
And so I think they were pretty successful with that. But then I also wonder how much better it might have been if they had stuck more with a serialized approach and tried to tie more episodes together. And now, granted, as I have probably only seen at most 30%, 35% of all the episodes, then I can't quite tell you how many tie together. I know once you get into certain story arcs towards the later seasons, they are more heavily serialized.
I would imagine they saw the success of DS9 season 4 and 5, and maybe they changed their tune in like 3 or 4.
Yeah, and I actually think that is when a lot of the series improves as well.
Makes sense.
I do wonder if they had approached it with a more coherent story arc, then maybe I would have liked it better before.
Right.
But as far as it goes, what they tried to do, their goal, they're very successful at. You can just watch a couple episodes of Voyager.
Sure.
And they don't necessarily tie it together. But there is that overarching trying to get home storyline.
Sure. And let's talk about that for just a second. There's another show where they're trying to get home. It's called Battlestar Galactica Reimagined, which came out after this. Yep. I believe 2003 was the miniseries for that. So 2 years after Voyager, we know who Ron Moore is. We know that he's involved with Deep Space Nine. Maybe he likes what Voyager's doing. Maybe he likes some of his own ideas about the enemy hidden among us and changelings and Cylons that are skin jobs. And he whips up this thing with a let's get home at the same time as this other thing. I don't know all of the things that inspired Ron D. Moore. It'd be interesting to sort of read about that. But the idea of a voyage home, here's what I like about this from a sort of outside of the a meta perspective is this. One of my biggest complaints about Star Wars is this gravity of the original series. This gravity
that they just cannot escape.
They can't escape the black hole that is the twirly flip lightsabers. They can't get away from the name Skywalker.
Yeah,
they can't,
even the exact characters.
They can't get away from axial super lasers redone over again. They can't get away from Luke Skywalker being reduced to drinking tit milk from a goofy, funny alien. They can't get away from the gravity of that which they have created. It is very annoying. How many times have I said, can we just be 1,000 years in the future?
Yep.
Can we get away from all of this stuff? Because believe me, The expanding universe has a lot of duds in the novels, which actually is considered legacy now. That's not canon anymore. But there is a Thrawn trilogy. It is very good. It is still tied to it, but that's just an example. You can go way into the future of Star Wars. You can go way into the past of Star Wars. And here we have a situation where the original series, Next Gen, and Deep Space Nine, they have many differences. Many different things make those three series great. Here's what Voyager has that they don't have at all. They are completely free of Alpha Quadrant politics. Mm-hmm. They said, let's get out of this box. Let's go over here. And for that, I applaud them. That's scary.
Yeah.
That's a scary proposition when you have made such a great show as DS9 with all this interesting political intrigue, and you really can see how this would work in the Star Trek universe, to then say, we're going to erase it at our most successful time. Yeah. I mean, season 3, we haven't quite hit Dominion War yet, but that's ballsy to do. I wish Star Trek would do it. Star Wars would do it.
Yeah.
So that's the meta of Voyager. That's gutsy. That's a gutsy call. And for that, I applaud them.
Yeah. And it gives a lot of storytelling potential.
Totally. With no real rules.
No, exactly. And now you see a lot more heft to trying to stick with the Prime Directive. You see a lot more, kind of the morality of, well, we only have this one ship. Mm-hmm. We have no, friends nearby, certainly. Because even, as you're going through, this completely foreign space, you are going to meet new peoples and everything. And maybe some of them are great and helpful.
Right.
Maybe they're not. So you have so many potential issues there that you can explore. And so I do think that the premise was a very strong one.
Yes.
And I do worry, from what I remember of the series, that it never quite lives up to it.
Right. So that'll be the question as we bounce around and come back and forth through Voyager. But just think of the things that you could do in a show like Voyager.
Well, I had a fun little thought as I was rewatching Caretaker and everything. I was like, you know what? It's almost like, it's kind of like Kung Fu.
The legend continues?
Yes. You're now the stranger coming into town.
You're going to walk the Earth.
Yeah. Or the galaxy. And you're going to come into town. Like maybe you help some people solve some problems and stuff like that.
Right.
Maybe you're the A-team in space, so to speak. If you can find the Voyager, they can help you. And something like that. Maybe people do come to try to find Voyager to help.
Yes.
To get help and stuff like that because they heard of, they did something with, like, I had a sudden, like, thought process of, wow, if this had become like that kind of a traveling,
Indeed.
Monk situation.
Sure.
Yeah, like so many Westerns.
Yeah.
Blown into town.
Blown out of town.
Yeah.
A little tumbleweed across the bow of the ship.
Yeah.
Right? Right, yeah, because you go to all these crazy random adventures with all these new rules and politics completely undefined.
Yeah.
You take a show like Voyager and you look at DS9 and talk about the stark differences. Much to Kira, Nerys, and the Bajoran, well, maybe much to Tana Los's chagrin, we see the galaxy coming to Bajor whether they want it to or not, right? Bajor is like the stationary Voyager, and everything's coming to it. Exactly, Voyager's like moving through the galaxy.
Yeah.
It's a very different premise, which is really neat. And then when you take a show like Voyager, you have to think to yourself, we're so far from Starfleet. What if they don't agree with Janeway?
Yeah.
Is she going to threaten them with arresting them and putting them on court-martial? Who's going to look over it?
Yeah.
Who's going to decide? This is something that's going to come up in one of our episodes we're going to cover.
Yep.
Who makes these grand decisions? Janeway finds herself as the supreme Starfleet authority because she does not have a subspace communication with Starfleet Command. And she has nobody to talk to. She decides everything. The fate of the ship is in her hands, like it is in every captain's hands, but she has no support from Starfleet at all.
And so you have this caveat that she is the supreme Starfleet command in the Delta Quadrant, so long as her crew lets her
Exactly.
be. And now a portion of her crew, I'm not sure what percentage-wise, are Maquis.
Well, let's do the numbers as we know right now.
Who aren't known for their love of authority.
Yes. Let's do the numbers right now.
Yes.
You have Janeway.
Yeah.
That's the Starfleet person. Tuvok, Harry Kim, full-blown Starfleet people. Tom Paris sits in the middle. So it's almost designed like this on purpose, right? You have those three pure that's Starfleet blood. You have Tom Paris, who kind of has 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And then you have Chakotay and B'Elanna Torres, straight Maquis sympathizers. We haven't really talked a lot about B'Elanna, but I'm sure her episodes will come up.
Yeah, they don't explain too much about her now, except we do find out that she too went to Starfleet Academy.
Correct. They all Starfleet trained. It makes sense why they're competent.
Yeah.
So you have Tom Paris bridging the gap. So you have Federation majority. Tom Paris is the swing vote. Right? And then you have the other two. Let's not talk about Neelix and Kess at this point. So Tom Paris has a lot of power in a weird way in that he's the swing vote. And I'm not saying it's a democracy. It's not. She runs it. But like you said, we're in the middle of fucking nowhere. And if this gets squirrely, maybe we take the ship from you.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And while Paris does find himself, with a foot in both camps, so to speak, neither camp likes him. We see in this first episode that the Starfleet personnel are not really interested in having him aboard.
With the exception, with
the exception of Harry Kim.
With the exception of Kim.
Who is played as this young, completely naive guy who's getting taken advantage of by Quark, rather.
It's so good.
and
scurrilous insults.
I love that part.
So good.
But Quark's guest appearance is great.
It's great. You have to watch Caretaker just for Quark's guest appearance.
Exactly. And so we have, and the Maquis obviously don't like him either because,
he's in it for the money, not the heart, not the cause.
And he got caught during his first mission, essentially for him. So he wasn't even particularly an effective Maquis.
Sure.
But we have a bunch of kind of unknown number of Maquis crew.
That's the other thing.
Yeah, we're going to
how many sympathizers exist on Voyager as we speak?
Yeah, exactly. You could have Starfleet crew, or even just Starfleet crew who are not interested after a year and a half of being under Janeway's boot, so to speak.
Sure,
with no actual real Starfleet command to attend to.
What I like about this, Nate, is I like that the Voyager setup suggests that mutiny is a possibility so far from home. But it also suggests that on the other side of the coin, there's no reason to do that because you can't even get back to the Maquis cause. The Maquis cause is 70,000 light years away, so it's over, kind of.
Yeah, basically it's either you work together to get home,
correct,
or you mutiny and do something out here,
right?
Essentially.
Right.
So if you suddenly become interested in exploring the Delta Quadrant for your own gain or whatever, you take the ship from Janeway. But we see
that second they find a wormhole back to the Alpha Quadrant, Chakotay's like, I'll be taking the ship now.
This ship's going to look mighty fine as a Maquis vessel.
Oh, we're going to destroy a lot of Cardassians with this thing, baby.
With this Intrepid class.
Yes, Intrepid class. A little smaller.
And we haven't talked about it. I actually do like the look of Voyager.
Me too.
The actual ship.
Yep.
And it has movable warp nacelles, which is interesting.
Pretty
to
cool.
Adjust its warp field and everything.
They always would tweak it a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to make it a little different.
Without getting ludicrous like movies tend to do. They just tweak them a little bit to make them look a little different, give it a little bit more personality.
Yeah, and the saucer section is elongated.
Yes.
Which I like. And we actually then see that come up with the Enterprise E.
Yes.
When they do the Sovereign class, we see it's got a lot in common with the Intrepid class, so to speak.
Right.
But back to, there's other, we're going to get introduced to other Maquis members, not going into their particular episodes or anything. There's some real stone cold villains in there too.
Absolutely.
So that we're going to explore that as we go through the galaxy.
Yeah. Because if there's one thing every organization has in common, it's that it has a propensity to be infected by humans.
Yes.
And humans run the gamut from sociopathic killers to heroes.
Potentially undercover Cardassians.
Oh,
dun, dun, dun.
Sneaky Cardassians. What?
Yes.
Come on.
And so we'll see stuff like that. And so that is another great avenue for storytelling.
Yes.
So with Voyager, and maybe that is ultimately what subconsciously always affected me, is it has a ton of potential.
Exactly. Much like we talked about Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Right.
But I feel like, and then Deep Space Nine, I feel rose to its potential. Voyager, I'm not sure did, but I am now.
We have 70% of the, let's just say conservatively, 70% of episodes still to see. And maybe we didn't pick the greatest ones to watch.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that I think tempering it with that is fair to the series.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm actually now sort of looking forward to going through it a bit more.
Me too. Yep, me too. Much like I was with Enterprise.
Yeah.
Same kind of deal.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that interest me about Voyager going forward is just this idea of different types of struggles. We're going to learn about that struggle in the next episode we discuss, Nathan. This idea of a shortage of supplies, that's very much something Ron D. Moore presented in Battlestar Reimagined. Yeah. We're running out of water. We're running out of this. The Cylons are on our ass. What are we going to do, right?
How are we going to repair our ship?
How are we going to repair our ship? So that's something I'm sure we'll get into, but you would imagine, was the Voyager fully stocked? Because, I mean, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier in today's world survives on nuclear power for 30 years. Yes. That thing can put to port. It would need provisions and shit. It would need
food and stuff.
But that propulsion system doesn't stop for 20 years. It's insane. So the idea is how long... we know that the Voyager maybe isn't built like the Galaxy D for sure. That the Enterprise D can go 5 years before putting into port. How long can the Voyager go? Yeah. When do supplies become an issue? Was it if you were just hopping into the Badlands, were the provisions all fully on board yet? Maybe not. Maybe you got caught in a bad spot with the supplies on your ship, and that's going to become a factor. That's something the Enterprise D under Picard never has to worry about. There's not a supply issue ever. Never.
And once, certainly with Starfleet vessels, the energy is the main supply, so to speak.
The warp core.
Yes. And of course, we know runs on dilithium.
Right.
And antimatter, matter reaction, et cetera.
Sure. Much like nuclear,
So if you can get that up and running, you have your replicators and stuff like that. So you can certainly, thrive in that manner. But I don't know if it's discussed in this, but for some reason they are now not running low on dilithium, but they need to find a source.
That's the segue into what will be our next episode, right? Yep.
So we know that there is an issue there. Right. With making sure that their energy is stocked. In fact, we see that they aren't running the replicators; they are eating MREs essentially.
Exactly. So, they're eating MREs. They have to. They this is where Neelix sort of ends up finding his niche as a cook.
Yep.
So that's we've set up this series for a pretty interesting situation.
Yeah.
At this point, I reserve judgment on the characters. I don't know much about them, but I do like Janeway to start. Yeah. I think immediately...
I don't hate any of them to start.
Yeah, I think immediately I think Janeway's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know much about Chakotay yet. I don't know much about any of these characters at this point. But we know Janeway has I believe a husband, a partner. Now she's gone from him.
They were about to have puppies.
Yep, they were about to have puppies. He put a litter in her. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like Tom Paris is Tom Paris is the type of character who could go one of two ways with me, like insufferable douche cheesy writing, or cool kind of roguish Han Solo type.
Yeah.
He could go one of two ways with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know.
And same with like Kim, you have
Kim seems pretty likable in a wide-eyed innocence.
Exactly. And so which way does he go with that? Does that become annoying?
Right.
Or does it, become, a positive character?
Sure. And in the fact that he's growing connected to Tom early interests me, because Tom probably has a much more jaded view of the world compared to the innocence of Harry Kim. And that seems like an interesting dynamic to me.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And then of course, Tuvok. I don't know. You don't know that much about the character, but you're instantly intrigued by a Vulcan chief of security.
I think that's one of the best chief of securities you could have.
Yeah, and we see that he's like all Vulcans, has no problem lying.
Right,
because he's an undercover officer. So that we finally need to put that to bed.
Put that to bed.
The Vulcans don't lie bullshit.
Yep. If you're going to convince the world you don't tell a lie about not lying.
Yes, exactly. And then you're evidently the perfect narc.
Absolutely. Yeah. So no, I like Tuvok.
Oh, you can trust him. He's a Vulcan.
Yeah. See those pointy ears? He's good to go. He's above board, that guy. Yeah. So no, Tuvok I like instantly because long story short, there used to be a role-playing game made by FASA, of all people, called Star Trek.
Yes.
And I played it in high school.
Yep.
And my friend made a Vulcan chief of security before Voyager even existed.
Nice.
And I always am like, dude, you predicted this. He's like, it's the perfect fucking security guy, man.
Yeah.
He's great. He's on top.
Strong, smart.
on top of things.
Not emotional.
Not emotional about it. Right. You'd hope he'd make objective decisions about the security and not get too cute with it. And so, I am looking forward to it. I know they pick up some more along the way. I know Jerry Ryan enters the series. We're not going to get into that now. But as it stands, we have Chakotay. We have Captain Janeway. We have B'Elanna Torres. We have Tuvok. We have Tom Paris. We have Chakotay. And then the non-crew members are Neelix and Kes. Yeah.
Well, and then also there's the EMH, the Emergency Medical Hologram.
Absolutely. How could I forget?
He actually, I think, it obviously doesn't have too much in the first episode, other than, finding out that he is basically the entire medical staff for the ship. And,
since they're all gone,
we have this kind of X factor of, well, how intelligent is he? Mm-hmm. Obviously there's an AI capability there, but is he going to be a full-fledged character?
Right.
Which, can he learn and grow? Or is he going to be just kind of a source for, some kind of medical bay humor? Or something like that.
Bedside manner.
And so you see that could really go either way. From what I've known of the series, I was looking forward to that character in particular.
Sure.
And how he develops.
Sounds
because good. He does a great job. Ricardo Montalban. No. Picardo? Robert Picardo. Robert Picardo. Hey, he's got Picardo in the name. Picard. So.
Now he's going to be Ricardo Montalban going forward. You understand what you've done?
Well, he underplays everything versus overplays.
Yeah.
So
we'll see. Maybe not when we talk about him.
But yeah, exactly. We'll see. But so I am now a lot more hopeful.
Yes.
Looking forward to Voyager episodes.
This is fair.
Yes. And now that we've done a primer, we can kind of jump right into them.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
This
is a good discussion. And quite enjoyable. Hopefully this sort of wet your beaks a little bit for what's to come with Star Trek Voyager. And you can always reference this episode as we bop around. We probably will have to ourselves, probably more relevant for the DS9 stuff we're going to come back to remember how was that political landscape again if we don't get back to DS9 for a while. So,
Yep.
All right, we are going to get out of here. But before we go, a call to action. Please, I'm telling you right now, if you review this show on Apple Podcasts and you take a screenshot of it and you email me, Dean@libertystreetgeek.net. That's Dean@libertystreetgeek.net. I will send you cool stickers for the show. Yeah. No charge to you. I'll ship them. I've shipped to England. I've shipped to Australia. Mm-hmm. I don't mind shipping. And that's while supplies last. So review us on Apple Podcasts. I know you're an Android user. I don't care. Make an account. Do it. You'll get some free stickers and a nice little letter in the mail from Nathan and I. And if you do that, email me your address with a screenshot and say it's done, and I'll go, great, here's your stickers. Yeah. I got a few more to send out today. I've been sending them out pretty routinely. We've sent out a lot, so I want to keep sending out more. And the reviews, having a nice review bump early makes people maybe not scroll by so quickly because they go, oh, these guys are pretty established, which of course we have the benefit of having our LSG Media listeners from our various shows who have sort of transported over to give us the boost that we need.
Yes. So, and if you're not a member of the LSG Illuminati or even a follower of Lost Drive-In,
absolutely,
by all means, subscribe to Lost Drive-In as well.
Yep.
And come check us out in the Facebook groups. There's quite a few Star Trek memes to be shared.
Yep. We have
the Kirking Off group.
We have the Kirking. If you search Kirking Off, you'll find it.
Yep. But make sure you spell it right.
Make sure you you might be in a very different group.
Yeah.
And you will and you just have to answer a couple of questions to prove you're not a robot. So.
Yes.
All right, good shit, Nathan. We're going to get out of here and we will catch you guys on the flip side.
See you later.
You've been listening to Kirking Off, a warped Star Trek shakedown from LSG Media. Don't forget to visit us online at libertystreetgeek.net. That's libertystreetgeek.net.
Hey everybody, this is Dean just breaking in the end here to say thank you to Floyd Fry for providing the lovely dulcet tones that you hear on the intro and outro of this particular podcast episode. He can be found on the Pop List podcast, as well as Scranton Talk, a generational The Office podcasts. And of course, I must thank the inimitable Scofflaws, who were gracious enough to let us use this great piece of music that we had to have for Kirking Off, called William Shatner. Make sure you guys pop over and check out what they have going on. And of course, thanks to all of the listeners who have been listening, subscribing, and sharing and all of that jazz. You guys make this whole thing possible. I put you all up for promotion. You're the best. Thank you. We'll see you next time.